Look, and the topic I wanted to talk about, this is quite a segue. I don't know how to segue this well. I haven't quite got that sort of Ben Shapiro-esque way of just smoothly getting to another topic. So I will just put black sovereignty down, and I'm going to pick up a totally different topic. Voluntary superannuation. We have compulsory super. We have compulsory super in Australia. It was introduced under Keating, so this was going up to 30 years ago. And there is a debate sometimes about whether it should stay at 9.5% or 10% or go to 12 or go to 15. I would like to put another option in. The compulsory level should be 0. It should be voluntary. And there's a bunch of rebuttals to that. And I'm very aware of them. I wrote a report about this topic for the NPAQ, the Nurses Professional Association of Queensland. I wrote it a couple of years ago. I printed out a copy here, not that that helps you all, but I did put a link underneath this video. So please go and check that out if you get a chance. I'm just going to be talking a little bit to that article in my rant here. Wait a second, I've got to put that comment up there. Voluntary everything, well said, informed dissent. But at least in this instance, voluntary superannuation. Now, I understand the reason for voluntary super is understandable. There's twofold reasons. One is some people save too little and it screws up their retirement and you want to help fix them. So it's a paternalistic argument of these people are making a mistake. Let me fix their life. Now, when I say it's paternalistic, I'm not a fan of paternalism, but there is an internal logic. It is true. People make mistakes. There is some truth to that. And if you could have a benevolent, godlike figure come and fix all of our mistakes, it's theoretically possible you could improve our lives. So let's put that argument is out there. That is a real argument. Perhaps forcing people to save more will improve their long-term well-being. And the other argument is that without superannuation, we have the aged pension. The government pays the aged pension. It is expensive. It is bloody expensive and getting more expensive. And what are we going to do about this ever-increasing cost on the government purse? One solution is require people to save for their own retirement, and then they will use their forced savings, their superannuation, and they won't use the pension, and it'll save the government money. So those are the two big arguments in favor of compulsory super. And I would put back against both of those that they both utterly fail the test of just checking, well, is that true? I mean, it's kind of important. I understand people have good intentions. We should not be judging policy by intention. We should be judging policy by outcomes. And what I'm about to say will seem boringly obvious, but it is so often not done. You should only have government policies if the benefits exceed the costs. Now, as soon as I say it, everyone says, yeah, of course. But that is so rarely how we assess government policy. Right? So we should require that of politicians. We should require that of bureaucrats. We should require that of anyone offering some new fandangled government program or a defense of a government program. Wait a second. Do the benefits exceed the costs? I understand you have good intentions. That's very nice. You get a gold star and you can call yourself moral. But does it work? It's far more important than do you think you're moral? So going to these points, does it help people? Does it help fix people's decisions so that they're better off? And no, in important ways. Forced savings, I've written this down as a couple of lines here. It forces people to save often, not always, like sometimes it helps, but often it forces people to save the wrong amount in the wrong way at the wrong time. What do I mean by that? The wrong amount. Well, let's split the public. I know there's 1,000. I'll go back and you can see it's live, right? We make mistakes. So let's cut that, start again. The fundamental issue is that people's situations are amazingly diverse. There's very different situations, and the right decision for different people are going to be very different depending on how rich they are, their preferences, the time in their life, the external costs and revenues coming in their family situation. All of those things will impact the best savings rate for them at any point in time. And yet compulsory super is fixed. I think it's fixed 10% at the moment, going to 12%. Someone can correct me if those numbers aren't right, but their point is they're fixed for everyone. It's not 6% for some and 15% for others. It's a fixed minimum amount. And what you really need to do is allow for the fact that very different efficient savings rates are for different people at different times in their life. First thing to consider, the very low income people on like the lowest 20 percentage points, for those people, when they switch to the pension, their income goes up. Let's consider that. When they're working, they've got such a low income that when they switch to the pension, their income goes up. What compulsory super does is it forces them to save when their income is low so that they can get that money back when their income is higher. It is idiotic. I mean, it is directly harming those people. It's doing the exact opposite of what a superannuation system is supposed to do. The whole idea of superannuation system, save when you're richer so that you can spend that money when you're poorer. For the poorest people out there, they're poorer while they're working. It's ridiculous to require them to save extra than that during that period of time. So for those people, it is definitely a bad system. Then you've got your middle income people. Middle income people, you force them to save now and then they go on the pension. The problem with that is the way the pension is set up is we have such high effective marginal tax rates once they retire that they get such a bad bang for the buck. So they save $100 during their working life and they get $10 richer when they retire. So I'm just using a simple rounded example there, but that isn't too far from the truth for many people. For middle income people, savings significantly decreases their ability to use their money during their working life, and it hardly increases their retirement position at all. So it's a really bad trade-off. Save a lot of money, get very little back, and that's because of the high EMTRs, but that is how the system works. So for poor people, it's terrible. For middle income people, it's terrible. For rich people, it works well. But here's the kicker. For rich people, you don't need to make it compulsory. I mean, have we really set up a compulsory super system because we all have bleeding hearts for some high income people that have probably, they own their house, they've got investment properties, they've got a portfolio, but we better make sure we help them to save a little bit more. They don't need it. They've already got their savings, right? So it's either, look, superannuation system, it's a nice system. If you're rich, it's unnecessary to make it compulsory. If you're poor, it's a terrible idea. If you're middle income, it's probably a bad idea. I mean, different situations, different people, but probably a bad idea, at least to the degree we have it now. So that is the wrong amount of saving. And then at the wrong time. We've got 10% required savings, 10.5. Thank you, Tim Lester. He's updated me there. It's up to 10.5 now, going to 12. 10.5% savings, but that's what it is when you're 20 and when you're 30 and when you're 40 and when you're 50. It doesn't take very much understanding of life cycle theory to know that at different times in your life, you're in very different situations. Sometimes you have low incomes and lots of expenses. You should save less. Sometimes you have much higher incomes and lower expenses. You should save more. I mean, this is very obvious, but we've got a compulsory system saying 10.5 for everyone all the time, no matter the stage of life. If you have particularly high costs at that stage of life, you should save less to pay for the costs. So such as university, right? That is a big upfront cost. Maybe buying a house, a big upfront cost. Children, take it from me. I've got a 1-year-old and 3-year-old right now. It's quite costly. During those times, it is ridiculous to force people to save and then often go into credit card debt to pay for their children, which is a ridiculously bad situation to put people in. You should just let them pay for their costs. But later in life, for most people during, for instance, their 40s and 50s, they will have peak income and their kids are aging out and leaving the nest. And that is a great time to save. They shouldn't save 10% there. They should be saving 20, 30%. So sometimes you should save 0. Sometimes you should save negative, right? Going into debt for university. Sometimes 0, sometimes 5%, sometimes 30. But instead we have a rule saying everyone 10.5%. No matter how rich you are, no matter what your preferences, no matter what stage of your life, no matter how many kids you've got, no matter what other costs you've got going on, no matter if you have big health expenses you can't avoid, no matter if you want to buy a house. Which takes us to the third point here. So that's the wrong amount at the wrong time and in the wrong way. How should people save and invest? Well, look, shares is a good option, and that's what super is. Overwhelmingly, it's shares. There's some fixed income, but fixed income has a low return, and people are searching for returns. So most people's super portfolio is very heavily invested in shares, and that's fine if you want to make that choice. But for a lot of people, one of the best investments they'll ever make is their home. So the idea that you're forced to put money into shares that you don't want to buy, and in the meantime, you then can't save for a deposit for a house that is probably going to be a pretty good investment. Doubly so, because if you live in it, then the capital gains tax is waived. And thirdly, because it's not just an investment. People get a lot of consumption value out of living in a house they own. The feeling you get when you walk in with your keys, and this is mine, this is my little Australian dream. And that is an important thing. And we tell those people, no, you're too stupid to know what you should invest in. You shouldn't buy a house. That's not right for you. Papa government knows that no matter how rich you are, no matter what stage of life, no matter what you want personally, you should buy some shares. So that's what we got. Compulsory super forces people to save the wrong amount at the wrong time in the wrong way. Now, not everyone, by the way, investing in a managed fund of shares is a perfectly legitimate choice. And at some stages of your life, for some people, it's a great idea. And I think it should be encouraged, but it shouldn't be compulsory. It should be one option amongst many. I like the idea of if people save for their retirement, it could be tax advantaged. That's good. It incentivizes people to save for their future. But there is so much diversity of people's situations. As I said before, different wages, different times in life. The idea of a fixed blanket 10% minimum, I think, really screws up most people. So it's bad for the poor. It's bad for the middle income. It's bad for people buying a house. It's bad for people buying a business. It's bad for people with high costs. It's bad for people with families. I mean, there's very few people left, right? But then the response is, yes, all right. So compulsory super basically screws over nearly all Australians, but at least it saves the government money. And here's the kicker. It doesn't. The current system we've got now has not improved the budget balance. If you look at the totality of it, the benefits and the costs to the budget, which the primary thing should be the benefits and the costs to the people. But if you look at the benefits and the costs to the budget, switching to the compulsory super system has cost the budget money. Right? There's been 68% of people are still on the pension when they retire. So most people are still getting some amount of pension. But now we have forced more and more people into tax advantage savings for retirement, and that is a tax expenditure that costs the budget. So it's not even achieving that goal. And as part of that argument, by the way, because the government just forces people to save, it absolves them of the responsibility to actually make good policy that incentivizes savings. We should have policy that incentivizes savings. You should do that by making it a good idea. But instead, the government can just make it a terrible idea, and they have, right? I mean, they've made superannuation for poor and middle income people a terrible idea. And then they go, oh, we don't have to fix the policy. We can just force them. So I think that is a terrible point. Having said all of that, that's not even, none of those points are my main reason for disagreeing with compulsory super. Compulsory super means that the super industry, which is basically big banks, big unions, and fund managers, those three groups basically control all of the super industry funds. That super industry, big unions, big banks especially, now have massive power in our system. Massive and underappreciated power in our system. They got so much power, they're able to drive up the fees so high that they're basically fleecing us according to up to 30 or $40 billion a year. This is an amazing amount of fees that they're taking from us, and they've got enough market power to be able to do it. They've got, this was 2 years ago, these numbers, $3 trillion. $3 trillion under management. That's 150% the size of the entire GDP. That's bigger than the entire traded ASX, the entire Australian Stock Exchange. Our super funds could buy the entire stock exchange, every share in Australia. And that would mean these big unions, big banks, but especially these big unions, would control a massive chunk of all the capital that exists in this country. Now, this will be a slight piece of hyperbole, but hyperbole is fun. The whole idea of socialism is the workers controlling all the capital. We say, oh, we wouldn't be socialist. We don't want to be socialist. We just want big unions to control more than 50% of all the capital in the country. And we want to pretend we haven't done it. And all of this power, it's not even dispersed around. It is concentrated in the hands of this super industry. And when they have that power, what do you do with power? Well, you drive up your own profits. And we can see that. The fees for Australian super industry is disproportionately above what it is for most other countries. So they clearly have market power. And when you have market power and you don't need to care about your customers, which they clearly don't, what can you do? Whatever you like. And you don't have to worry about the returns you're giving your customers. You can decide the most important thing, the most important way to use capital in Australia, it's diversity, inclusion, and equity. That's the most important thing. Or maybe it's stakeholder capitalism. Now, maybe we should go over and ask the WEF to tell us exactly how to use the capital. Maybe we should team up with the government and they can tell us the best places to allocate our capital to cure climate change and whatever other thing they want to do. And if our customers don't like it, you know what? Screw them. It's compulsory. What are they going to do? This is $3 trillion of capital in our country, controlled by the super industry, big banks and big unions. That amount of concentration of power should scare anyone. It definitely scares libertarians like myself. It should scare conservatives in the hands of these big unions, and there are a bunch of lefties running corporate agendas. But it should scare lefties. They're supposed to be scared of concentrated power. They always tell us that in every other situation. They don't want all this power concentrated in the hands of a few plutocrats. That's what we've got. And I would argue that the only way to weaken their power is to stop having guaranteed money. The compulsory superannuation, and you'll note whenever people argue for more compulsory super, look at who's making the arguments. Scratch the surface. You'll find a big bank, a big union, or a fund manager saying, I think it's a really good idea if we force average people to give ever more money and power. Wow, I didn't see that happen.